Well, hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this afternoon session of the second Decarbonisation Summit taking place here in Manchester. My name's Rachel Burden. I usually present the Five Live Breakfast Show in the mornings. That's what I was doing this morning, in fact. But last week I was here, or at least I was over there in the Science Museum with two 6-year-olds trying to entertain them on their half-term holidays. I know this place very, very well. I don't know this place. If I did, I may not have worn my heels today. The early innovators clearly weren't designing these floorboards for people with heels. Anyway, it's fabulous to have you all here with us today. And this is our headline session. I'm really excited to introduce you to our panelists here today. It's all about collaboration, this next panel, and that embraces a whole range of different topics, from net zero to transport, energy, heat, and sexy, as we now know it is, retrofitting. I just want to say thank you very much to Bolt for partnering with us on this panel. Bolt's aim, if you don't know them, is to bring on-demand transport to a much bigger user base and to help cities evolve towards decreased traffic congestion and pollution. Their vision is to build the future of mobility with one platform that connects people with cars, motorcycles, scooters and e-bikes in a fast, convenient and affordable way. So thank you, Bolt. Right, let me introduce you now to our panel this afternoon. Delighted to have here with us Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, Tracy Brabin, Mayor of West Yorkshire. Here, to my left, Steve Rotherham, the Mayor of Merseyside, and the non-mayor on the panel, Neil Kirby, who is Managing Director of SSE Enterprise. So we're going to have a chat here on the stage, and then as before, we'll be taking some questions from people who are viewing this online, and then questions for you in the audience. But there's masses to discuss, so we're going to try and get through as much as we possibly can in our given time. But before we go any further, as if 3 mayors weren't enough, we have a 4th mayor to contribute today. He couldn't be with us in person, but I just want to introduce you to this short little video from Mayor Jamie Driscoll from the North and Tyne Combined Authority.
You don't need me to tell you how serious climate change is. We're already seeing wheat crops fail in Canada and India, and drought setting the world's forests ablaze. We must all do our part. In the north of Tyne, our Green New Deal Fund is operational, empowering partners, public and private, to invest in low carbon operations, creating hundreds of jobs and cutting thousands of tonnes of emissions. Our offshore wind investment is providing clean energy for our region and beyond. And the investments by British Volt and Envision in the northeast are driving the electrification of transport, creating nearly 15,000 jobs in gigafactories and the supply chain. Our green industrial revolution is creating secure, well-paid jobs, and we're training people to get them. Because greener has to mean fairer. But housing produces 1/3 of our carbon emissions. Wasted heat equals wasted money. We can tackle the climate crisis and the cost of living crisis at the same time. Our Citizens' Assembly on Climate Change told us retrofitting was critical. We've identified 140,000 homes for priority retrofitting. This will create 3,500 local skilled jobs for a decade. But we have to start now. And I haven't got the money. No Metro Mayor in England has got the money. But Westminster can help us. Cold, damp housing makes people ill. Every pound spent on retrofitting saves the NHS 42p. Add in the long-term savings on fuel bills and the economic boost from all those pay packets, and this becomes self-funding on a national level. I'd like government to give Metro mayors like me power to regulate the private rented sector, to require all homes to meet a decent standard of insulation with appropriate low-carbon heating systems. I would then make the money available, levering in green funds so that property owners can pay it back over decades from their increased property values and energy savings. We have all the technology we need. The mayors have the political will. If government work with us to lever in the money, we can build a greener, fairer Britain, providing warmer homes for a cooler planet.
Thank you very much to Jamie there. And I should say we're represented by Labour mayors today, but we're going to hear from a Conservative, from a government minister in our final panel session as well. And I guess one thing we'll probably address is this is beyond party politics in many different ways. But I want to start this panel by perhaps getting you to talk from the private sector perspective, Neil, first of all. Your role within the SSE decarbonisation project and how important the collaboration is between private and public sectors.
Yeah, so if you look at SSE as a whole, and it was mentioned this morning in the introductory session that SSE will be spending in the region of £24 billion between now and 2030 on decarbonisation, on moving the UK economy towards carbon zero. And that's the equivalent of about £7 million per day. And we are actively creating over 1,000 new green jobs per annum within that profile. If I bring it a bit closer to home, the conversation Andy and I had at COP26 was that we thought it was a fabulous event. There was an awful lot of commitment given at the event, but how could we take something that was global and make it more meaningful locally? And it was on the back of that coffee that we picked the Manchester venue, my hometown, you can probably tell from the accent. We picked the Manchester venue to start kicking into action a more informative debate about some of these issues that can be handled on a local level. So if you look at my particular business within SSE, mine's all about distributed energy. So it's about putting batteries and solar farms in place that can feed PPAs for local authorities. It's about putting electric vehicle infrastructure in place, heat networks. We've just announced a heat network this morning in your geography, actually, 25 million in the Leeds area.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're putting additional networks in place, and we're trying to create this hub idea, if you like, that we can localise energy and energy infrastructure. And if people have time, if you just go out the back of the room here, you can actually see a model of one of our EV hubs on display here. So this year we'll probably put about 20 in place, and our hope is over the next 5 years we'll do about 300, and those will be in each of the 3 geographies we've got here, as well as our broader infrastructure. So it is starting to become real, and it's here and now. And one of the things that really excites me, and this was the key point that we touched on at COP26, to me, this is as much about what it does for levelling up and creating long-term skilled jobs as it is for the actual capital investment in the economy. It's a chance we'll probably never get again to really raise standards of living for people.
Yeah, levelling up, I'm sure, is a phrase you 3 Labour people will be fully on board with. But Andy, in terms of, and all cities are facing this challenge, getting to the net zero targets that you're setting yourselves, where on earth do you begin?
With a target. So we have a science-based target, Rachel, for 2038, a zero carbon city region by 2038. Manchester is famous for facing the future, bringing on the new. So it's very much in keeping with the history of this place. We see this as a chance to do everything that Neil's just said, to renew industry, to create really good jobs for people. But actually, by going on that 16-year journey from here to a zero carbon city region by 2038, as Jamie said in the film, we don't just want to be greener, we want to be fairer as well. Because it could be an opportunity to reduce the cost of public transport, lower people's energy bills, create really good, solid jobs for people, and skills, I think, is something we'll probably want to come back to in this discussion. That is what it could be. There's a risk, though, if it's not funded properly from the centre and we're not given enough powers, it could be the opposite. Greener could be perceived to be unfairer. And that is a real risk at the moment. I think maybe the public see it as that at the moment. We're going to hit them with charges. We're going to make them change things they like doing. So if we're going to get there, Rachel, I think we need to cities need to change the narrative really and show how it can be in people's interest to buy into this. And the truth of the matter is, if the UK is going to hit 2050, the cities on this panel and other big cities are going to have to be the pace setters. We are going to have to be freed up to get out there, prove the new technologies, build the skills bases that will be required, and then get the necessary momentum behind the country's drive to net zero. The cities will be the leaders here. And we've issued a statement today, mayors from across the country, 8 of the mayors, including Sadiq Khan, who is chair of the C40. We're all saying, free us up now to do this. Give us the power and the resources to do, to work with Neil and other colleagues in the private sector to get the required level of pace into this. And I think that's something we've really got to do and waste no further time on.
Jamie was very clear that more money is needed from the centre, but Tracy, can collaboration with the private sector or amongst local authorities or metropolitan authorities, can that in any way compensate for what might be a lack of funding from Westminster?
Well, collaboration is really the way through this. You can't do it on your own. So when Neil was talking about your budgets, whilst I think in West Yorkshire we've allocated £40 million substantial amount of the gain share to deliver on my climate and environment plan. I mean, it's pennies in comparison to what you're dealing with. So we have to absolutely work with business. Well, whilst I've got my Green Jobs Task Force working with business, we are over halfway to my target of 1,000 skilled jobs in the green sector. So we're at 650 of pledged jobs, but still it is a drop in the ocean. But collaborating, and Sadiq Khan and myself have talked, all of us have talked about procurement in electric buses, also about sharing heat networks, and also intelligence and smarts. And I think that we, in West Yorkshire, we've committed to zero carbon by 2038. 2020s has to be the doing decade. We have to be moving at enormous speed. And we can't wait for government to decide whether we can have something or not, because it always seems extraordinary that we're in this beauty contest situation where, for example, there was a beauty contest bid for EV charging points. We know where we want our charging points. We know where they would work. They're not for every community. But to have to bid against each other is just counterintuitive when actually this is so urgent and so important. And if I can say, it is a unique moment because I think the public are with us, because they see the crisis in energy. They see their costs going up. When we're talking about retrofitting homes, making your home warmer, but also reducing your energy bills, suddenly that's an argument we can make that impacts on people's lives. So this is a really great opportunity, and that's why that letter was so important, because government talk about expanding devolution and powers. What are they? Well, we're saying you give us more powers in this sector. We can work with partners like yourself, like I'm working with in West Yorkshire, and we can absolutely turbocharge this agenda.
But you say you've got the public on board, Steve, and I'm sure you're all acutely aware of this. With the current cost of living crisis, I would suggest that people's main concerns about being able to fill up their car with petrol or pay for the weekly food shop, are they coming to you saying, retrofit my home, please?
Well, yeah, but to address the first point, there are people who don't agree that we should be paying what they call a green premium on energy and subsidising things like retrofitting when there's a cost of living crisis. But I think that's really, really short-sighted politics. The reality is for most people that it's those people in the houses that are the least energy efficient who are paying the most for their bills, their gas and electricity. Lots of people are on a card meter, and actually it costs you more per term or per kilowatt to use that than it does through a direct debit. So already the disadvantages are being further disadvantaged, so we need to tackle that. And we've invested, just like Tracy said, it's pennies really, but it's £50 million into a retrofitting programme. And we're the most advanced in the whole country at the numbers that we've already converted over, which saves about £100 a month. Now, in all honesty, I don't know how that sounds to people in the room, but to somebody who's struggling, with heating and eating, that's a lot of money. So
what do you do? How do you persuade people to effectively let you into their homes to carry out this work?
Honestly, really easy. I mean, if we had lots more money, we could do a lot more. It's not that we're not having any problems getting into them. It's the volume that we'd like to do, and those people who are really keen, because they will save on that. And people are much more environmentally friendly anyway. They don't want to waste heat, of course, for the cost of it, but they don't want to heat up the planet. It's not like when I was a kid, and well, I'm probably one of the oldest in here, I think, but we used to just throw everything into a dustbin and all that and not think about the environmental consequences. People are much more educated these days. So we're trying to do things, if you like, domestically, but strategically as well. We're trialling at this moment a programme to decarbonise energy-intensive industries. It's called Glass Futures. It's happening in St Helens and over on the Wirral in Unilever. So we're working with partners on that. We've got really ambitious plans for a Untitled project. We need the government to support us on that. At this moment in time, the government are a bit reluctant about moving into those sort of new technologies. But given that you don't have to decommission like you do on nuclear, a tidal project, I think it makes absolute sense. And then there's lots and lots of other things that we're doing on transport, and we'll all talk about transport, and especially on skills, that can help UK PLC.
Yeah, we'll get on to transport actually, but I just want to ask you, Neil, from your perspective, how much are you driven, or is SSE driven by consumer demand in this field? Is there any kind of sense of moral imperative that we have a duty as a fossil fuel company to rebalance perhaps the impact of our business in the past?
I think there's definitely a perception of a moral duty to do something. If you look at the spend I talked about, that 24 billion, that is substantially more than the profit that the business will make over the next 5 years. So there is that commitment towards that long-term investment. And the surest way out of the energy crisis, which isn't necessarily just a very short-term energy crisis, is to get that self-sufficiency in energy. And the more we can tap into renewable energy, the cheaper it becomes. You know, but if you've got energy becoming cheaper because it's done at scale, and if you've got standards of living rising because we're training people up and we're skilling people up, so we actually share that in the communities, you have got the best of both worlds. And the key is the level of trust between the partners to make sure it is open, it is transparent. You know, we do honour the commitments. So one of the commitments I made when we were in Glasgow was to take a gamble in this geography. I said, you know, we want the work with Greater Manchester. We want to prove ourselves. We've opened up a facility in the centre of Manchester. We're actively engaging with the academies now to start that training programme because it is a bit chicken and egg. You know, so we're putting the money into the assets already, but we're also putting the money into the training as well.
Should we talk about transport, Andy? Because I know it's one of your favourite things to talk about, one of your big frustrations as well. What kind of progress do you feel you're making in Greater Manchester?
No, we're making huge progress. So we've taken the decision to put buses back under public control after 36 years of deregulation. And the reason why that is so important is because it's only by having control of the system that you can dictate the pace on decarbonising the bus fleet, as Tracy wants to do, but also get the fares in the right place so you give people the ability to actually, there's no point lecturing them saying, use public transport, don't use your car. If it costs as much to catch a bus here as same in Yorkshire and Liverpool City region, it's much more expensive than London. But why is public transport more expensive in some of the poorest parts of the country? That is something that everybody needs to do something about. And actually, the three of us are. So by having the ability to control the system, we're committed, and I think Tracy is and Steve, to have a £2 capped adult fare, £1 for kids. I think we're all doing the same. So you think about 3 neighbouring city regions here where you can have a dramatic change in public transport. And actually, as we introduce that, we'll be electrifying the fleet, as Tracy said, or I think Steve's looking at hydrogen. The change can become real, and it can become real very, very quickly. So we've taken the decision, the first day of re-regulated services will be the 17th of September 2023. So it's happening, it's coming. And it's an example as to how the north of England can lead when it comes to the change that the rest of the country wants to see. So transport's critical, Rachel. I think it's at the heart of this. Both, yes, EV charging, Neil, and we would want to work with you on that. But we've got to integrate public transport in the north, make it much cheaper than it currently is. And in doing so, decarbonise. We're really proud that our trams out there that you'll have all seen while you've been here, they already run on renewable energy. And that is a good Greater Manchester success story. But actually within a decade, we could have an electrified bus fleet, hydrogen buses as well, where the whole system is running on green energy. And that is a realistic vision if, as Tracy was saying, we're backed to do it.
Tracy, Steve, do you want to have a word?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in an incredibly privileged position because I've been the mayor for a year, and these guys are slightly ahead, so I can learn from them and also copy all their good ideas. But certainly being part of the enhanced partnership, which we decided to go into, which unlocked money for us to change the bus network now, today in West Yorkshire. We got £70 million. But back to my point about the beauty contest, Oliver Coppard, who's unwell at the moment, but he sends his regards. He's the new mayor of South Yorkshire. South Yorkshire bid and got not a penny for their transport network. This is completely wrong. Now, with that 70 million, we are committed to reducing fares, capping them from September, single fares at £2, and then the M card, which is like the Oyster, it's the most sophisticated travel card outside of London, 450 as opposed to 550. So that's going to save some people who travel every day £500 a year. That's where we're starting, but the problem in West Yorkshire is routes. There are communities completely cut off. And there are companies, bus companies, because they don't make enough profit on these routes, they're cutting the routes. Now, we are stepping in and we are funding to replace those routes, but it's untenable. You can't carry on like that. Nearly 40% of the network going to be funded by the combined authority. It's not the way to do it. So by 2024, because of the government timescales, we're going to be in a position, just before my next election, I'm going to be making the decision about whether we go to public control. And to be honest, it feels like the public are absolutely with us, because it's absolutely what Andy said. You can't bully people to get out of their car, but you have to offer them an alternative. And just about EV charging points, what is really important, of course, new builds need to have their EV charging. But what if you can't afford a car? What if you don't drive? What if you're disabled? So there's a new initiative in West Yorkshire where we're saying to planners and developers, we will sign this off, but you give the new tenant a 1-year bus pass. So, you know, in a way to try and get more people on the bus. And Andy likes ribbing me about my free bus Sundays. We had one last Sunday to try and get more people to experience what the bus is like. And we had a 30% growth on footfall, even though it was raining.
I only rib you because people don't actually go anywhere. They just go on the buses to save.
To keep warm.
That's Yorkshire for you.
They're really making the most. They don't want to go out. They don't want to go anywhere, but they're taking loads of trips. Yeah, go around in circles. But I think it's these initiatives with the political will across the whole region and the vision. You know, I'm lucky to have people who are further ahead to collaborate together to deliver.
How are you getting on in Liverpool, Steve?
Well, similar. I mean, as well as the collaborative aspect, there is competition, because I think that drives innovation, and we're looking at what we can do to be ahead on some of those things. I mean, in all honesty, I was going to go for £1.99 for me buses so that I could say it was the cheapest in the whole country. But the buses, they have to give a penny back to everybody.
Yeah. It's not top trumps, you know.
It is. But there's things that we've all learned from each other. And that's why you'll see a lot of that innovation happening here. And we've spoken about buses. 82% of public transport journeys are by bus, so we have to do something on that. We're buying our own trains, £500 million worth of new trains, the most sophisticated in the country, but the most accessible also. So there's stuff we can do there. We can save 1/3 of our overall emissions by doing this, by tackling some of the public transport challenges that we've got. But actually, one of the big things that we collectively are doing is trying to sort out the intercity. We've done the intracity, each of us, but the intercity stuff, the stuff between Liverpool to Manchester, Manchester to Leeds and all that sort of stuff. And we've seen announcements by government over many years about the watering down of what we were promised with Northern Powerhouse Rail. And our real concern is that there's been no economic impact assessment of these changes and what it actually means for people who will take longer journeys. And we need to factor that in as well. And unfortunately, you know, the Secretary of State seems oblivious to the concerns that we've raised with them.
Can I just ask briefly, you are sort of political colleagues, you all represent the same party, but thinking of Ben Houchen in Tees and Andy Street in Birmingham, both Conservative Metro mayors, how much do you have to do with them?
Well, we have an M10 group. We have a group of MPs.
We collaborate. I mean,
and wherever we can, we've come together. I mean, Ben is a bit more detached than anybody from the M10, genuinely, because he's the poster boy of the Tories and he's getting lots and lots of things. So I think he feels he doesn't have to contribute the same as we do to the M10, but he's still a member of it. And we always try to be non-party political wherever we can.
And Andy Street is a really advocate for the M10.
Yeah.
We do work collectively. We had a letter to the to the government about buses and the cliff edge of funding. We all, we signed it. And that's why things like letters to government collectively. I think it's 20 million people we all represent as a group. It's a powerful voice to government to try and get change.
It's just really important. You've hit on a really important point, Rachel. Tracy's the chair of M10 and is doing a fantastic job for us. And that is the platform for collaboration. So everyone should know about that because you can pitch ideas into the M10. And I think this is the key. We were all members of Parliament, the three of us. And when we left, I think we all left that world behind, didn't we? It's party first down there, and we see that what type of politics and lack of collaboration that creates. You come into this role, and if you're to do it properly, it's place first. And we all know that our places are interconnected, so there's no point in us being pointlessly competitive. We work together. And these roles that we occupy, if people kind of work with us and understand what we're trying to do, I think this is the route actually to giving the country a more functional political system. So on a place-first basis, because that actually unites people, doesn't it? Of all political persuasions, everyone here wants Greater Manchester to do well, doesn't it? Wherever everyone's coming from, or the same in West Yorkshire. I think this is where we can do something, I think, and add something. The decarbonisation summit, Steve just said it. If there's one key message coming out of this, decarbonisation could mean a solution to the cost of living crisis. And where is the place where that's going to be proven? The cities represented on this panel. Decarbonisation and a net zero country will be driven from the bottom up, not from the top down. That's the way you'll get there. You've got to win hearts and minds, as you were saying, to get people have their homes changed or change how they move. And we're the ones who can do it. And we're kind of a bit at that point now. We're ready to go and we're ready to prove this. And we just need the government to get behind us.
Just while we're talking about transport, Neil, apart from the sort of EV charging infrastructure, where else does SSE have a role in decarbonising the transport?
Yeah, I mean, on a broader basis, to be honest, we've been heavily involved, for example, in the electrification of bus networks. We did over 90% of the electrification in London, as an example. But it's part and parcel of this whole system approach, in every geography. As Andy said there, really, it starts from the bottom up. And actually taking a step forward, nobody's going to get to the end game unless we take steps forward on this journey. And I've been really pleasantly surprised by how much cooperation there has been between the public and private sector to date, and how many steps forward we have taken. It's not that long ago you would never have seen an EV charging point anywhere. Well, they're starting to come thick and fast now. It's not that long ago you wouldn't have seen an electric bus anywhere. Well, there are quite a number of electric buses now. Over the next 5 to 10 years, this hockey stick is really going to increase. Of course, we always need extra funding. Nobody can deny that. We need the funding to get us there. Yeah. But actually, the rate of change is really starting to progress.
Can I just still say, I charged outside the Science Museum the other day on one of the EV chargers, and I still had to do that thing, which is like, right, another new charger. What am I going to have to download? Actually, it was fine. It was fine. But you still have that fear if you're an EV driver, don't you? And you're charging publicly. It's like, okay, what's this one going to ask me to do? It was fine.
Where are we up to, Greater Manchester, then? As an EV driver, are we...
I don't
Actually, do we need to go?
Well, I don't charge that often publicly, to be honest.
Right.
But I was at the AJ Bell. The Aldi there has what looks like a public charger. I went in to charge there and they said, no, it's for staff only. Eventually they said that. I then had words with BP about that because it wasn't the truth. So the problem is always with this, as everyone here will know, is inconsistency. Yeah. But I know that's a kind of well-worn argument and it is something people are trying to address. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to go on about my gripe. But just to go to one of the questions from one of our viewers online, Dawn asks this: how do we deal with the issues of cost and provision of public transport in rural areas? Yeah. So I don't know which one of you, Tracy, maybe that's most relevant to you.
Yeah, I mean, that is a difficult issue because particularly when a network is run for profit, that's not going to be where your profitable routes are going to be. And that's why public control is really important because you have that strategic view of your region. Now, of course, there are innovations that I'm sure we've all, got in our regions, whether that's, dial-a-ride or, other community-led charities that get people around as well. But I think I'm not going to be able to solve that problem. until we have that control over where the network is. And at the moment, for example, Wakefield is the least connected region, I would suggest, in West Yorkshire, because we don't have the rail network going where we need it to. And Arriva have an industrial action at the moment, so there's no buses either. So there are people who will not be able to get their kids to their GCSEs, they won't be able to they haven't got a car, they won't be able to get to work. This is economically massively damaging for us. And certainly with rolling out the broadband networks to those rural regions, we need to also make sure that they're connected through transport as well. So, because people are going to be leaving the cities for a better quality of life, they want to live more rurally, but they want to be able to get about without having to get a car. It is a really big issue, but that can be solved by control.
Yeah. I want to move on to questions, but before I do that, have any of the three of you got like an easy win? Something that has made a difference or contributed to your decarbonisation targets since you came into power?
Yeah, I've got one, which is an easy win. We put £500,000 into a community environmental fund, and that was to teach kids about biodiversity and about the planet and all that sort of stuff. And it's been phenomenally successful. We haven't calculated the tonnage that we've taken out of the atmosphere, but it's not just about what we've done now. We've turned kids onto what's happening on their planet, and I think that can be replicated anywhere.
Yeah.
If I could just say one thing that really struck me, I was with Lord Callanan on a trip to look at retrofitting homes and insulation. And a mum came out to talk about the impact that it had had. And of course, we wanted to talk about, costs and energy costs. And actually, she just wanted to say, the thing for me is it's changed my family life. That the kids aren't all clustered in the kitchen where it's warm, doing their homework and arguing, and they can go into their bedrooms. I thought, of course, the simplicity of that, because their bedrooms are now warm because she can afford the energy costs. So if we can, there are 700,000 properties that could be eligible for retrofitting, which is a massive undertaking. And we've got pilots of 100 here, and we've got an ambition for nearly 2,000. But it's only going to it's not even going to skim the surface. We've got to really escalate this retrofitting because it's going to change people's lives.
The interesting thing on retrofitting is it's not just domestic properties. It's industrial properties, it's industrial plant and equipment. And the other interesting thing, which again we touched on at COP26, is retrofitting jobs are skilled jobs. So when you train people in retrofit, there's a longevity to that. And it's so easy wins, that is a relatively easy win. Get people trained up, get on the journey.
And I'm sure this has been raised today already, but this is a quick win. This building has been funded, I think I'm right in saying, for anyone at the museum might correct me if I'm wrong, but as part of our public sector decarbonisation programme across Greater Manchester. So it's buildings like this, but also libraries, leisure centres. We are on with that, and it's been a huge programme. But a building like this, and fantastic to think of it, isn't it, as a soon to be a fully decarbonised building.
No, it's amazing. We had the retrofitting panel was on just before lunch, and I think we should order t-shirts. Retrofitting is sexy, because by the end of that session, it was like, this is really cool. Right, one question on that, actually. Ian asks this: do the mayors think that treating retrofit funding as part of the energy system to reduce demand, if that was done, oh my goodness, can I read this? If that was done, a finance vehicle that could be regulated in the same way as the supply networks using a return on assets model. This could create the supply chain demand, drive cost reductions and skills development, rather than stop-start grants that don't encourage long-term investment. I probably haven't read that well. Are you following?
I think help Neil.
Andy,
You'll probably
Yeah, over to Neil.
I think I get the sense of it.
Yeah, I think what they're asking there is, could we use a model that encourages people to invest and get a return on that investment?
Right.
And I think that's a sensible model, to be honest. I think a blend of both. I think an element of grant funding is required, because without that, it is that incentive piece to force the change to happen. So I think you need the incentive mechanism, but I do think, and there are plenty of investment models that have been and are being developed to fit exactly that regime.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about this, though, Rachel, we do have to talk about skills. Steve's done a fantastic job leading for the mayors on this issue, but we have to get into the conversation about devolution of a degree of control over post-16 education, because the economy of Greater Manchester is different from West Yorkshire and Liverpool City region. Therefore, we have to have the ability to match the skills needs. You know, we're a massive digital and tech centre now, and we are always kind of working hard to make sure there's no sort of the pipeline of talent doesn't get broken. You know, and we're also looking at a huge green skills requirement, all of us. If retrofitting, for example, is to come through at the pace we need, and it's not just younger people coming through. There's a huge retraining need to be done for people with more traditional construction skills. I'm about to enter a negotiation with the government alongside Andy Street. Actually, we were the two that were chosen to be part of a trailblazer negotiation on deepening devolution. I think we'd all argue, without exception and across party lines, but Steve might want to add to this, we'd all argue, wouldn't we, Steve, for, I would say, complete control, actually, of the of post-16 education. And if not, co-commissioning, certainly control of the apprenticeship levy. These are the kind of ideas we've got to get into, because otherwise we won't be able to match the demand with the skilled people. In Greater Manchester alone, it's estimated by Net Zero Northwest that there are 80,000 good jobs to be had in retrofitting. 80,000. And the risk is we won't be able to bring them through quickly enough, or we won't have the people to do it. And that's got to be fixed soon.
Do you want to say what?
Yeah, just very quickly, that every area is being told by government that we have to produce skills improvement plans. We've done them, so we know the quantum of each occupational area that we need, and we're not being funded to provide the skills for the businesses in our areas, which means that the skills gaps and skills shortages are only going to grow.
I think one of the things I've seen that works really well, and it's not a counter completely to that, is where central and local authorities, in putting contracts out to tender, have insisted on those skills being developed as part of the contract. So they've made the private sector commit to the levelling up agenda, commit to apprentices, commit to training up people that otherwise wouldn't be trained.
Part of social value.
Do you notice that commissioning's getting cleverer in terms of the way that bodies like ours are letting those, you know.
But that's not the same thing, in all honesty, Neil. Good that you're doing stuff and good that others are doing stuff, but you don't know when you see the collective total of that, whether that's going to satisfy the demand in the future. There's only us who can do that at a strategic level. That's why we have skills improvement plans. So we've got all of that info. The data's there. The government just won't play ball with releasing a chunk of money that we know is underspent. So we know apprenticeship levy funding is there. The Treasury have agreed that there's funding there. So why can't we use it? Because otherwise it's a stealth tax on businesses like you and these people in this room.
Can I ask about that, Steve, though? Because we've got the apprenticeship levy share, which I'm sure you do, so that ASDA can't spend it. So we've got a nursery that can then train 10 of its members of staff to get level 2 or 3 or
I hate to do this, but we piloted it.
Yeah, very good. I stole it from you.
We did.
Brilliant.
Because exactly that was the underspend and using it. But what I'm saying is that there's a chunk of money there, and we know we've got demand in our areas because the governments have agreed our skills plans.
Yeah.
So why can't we use it for...
But one thing we do need absolutely devolved is the career service, because we know that it's patchy across the whole country, and that there are areas that do really brilliant, expensive ideas about what careers are and get businesses really engaged, and there are areas that get nothing. And you know, we can deliver. We've been historically, we can deliver.
Funnily enough, I'm doing a podcast about post-16 opportunities, about not going to university, and the lack of information that's available, and the patchwork of information that's available across the board is enlightening to me. And you know, it's out there, and there are people very enthusiastic about it. But
absolutely, Rachel, it's such an issue. We've brought through something that I used to call a UCAS system for apprenticeships to address exactly that. So it's called GMAX, Greater Manchester Apprenticeships and Careers Service. And I want young people in the city region to have one place to look if they want work or work-related opportunity, apprenticeships or training. And we're building that approach. But again, it's sort of a workaround. You know, we're trying to do it on a system that's fragmented. If actually, as Steve said, we had that oversight of the whole system, the power to shape it, GMAX would fly then if we had that. At the moment, it's kind of trying to pull it together. But, you know, I think all of the mayors, even Ben would agree with us on this, all 10 of the English metro mayors would say, if you give us greater control over post-16 education, that will put momentum into the regional economy. And I don't know why the government are dragging their feet on it.
If we had a government minister here to ask, I would put that to them, but we don't at the moment. Right, I do want to throw it out to the floor because time is limited. So to this gentleman down here, if you could just wait a second till we get a microphone to you, if that's okay, coming this way, just so that everyone can hear you loud and clear. And if you just want to tell us who you are and if you represent an organisation.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Guy Battle. I'm Chief Exec of Social Value Portal. So aren't we lucky to have you guys on the panel today? Absolutely fantastic. And if this isn't an advert for Devolution, I don't know what it is, but therein lies a conflict for central government, because you're asking them to give you more power so you can collaborate with someone like Steve, which is really interesting. I think there's something in there, but that's not my question or my comment. I think just picking up on what both Rachel, Tracy and Andy said about making the link between decarbonisation and people's real lives. We hear about the green levy and people just think it's a tax, right? And yeah, we hear about green jobs, but what the hell are green jobs? But then we hear about a house that suddenly the kids can work in there and bring it all the way down to that sort of social value, that contribution. I think it's really, really important. So I'd like to just hear what you're all doing, or one or two of you, and then also SSE as well. How are you making that link to real people as opposed to just a business stakeholder group?
So I kick off with that, yeah, because I think I touched on it earlier. You know, what we're doing to make it real is investing in the communities in which we invest in the assets. So I made the commitment at COP26. I said to Andy, I'll start to take the gamble in a number of geographies, not just in Greater Manchester, but because those facilities aren't yet there for education, for the skills that we need here, rather than wait for it, we'll start to work ourselves with virtual academies. We'll help train up academies. There was a lady in the audience this morning who mentioned about ethnic minorities in this geography and how difficult they find it to actually get onto the ladder of some of these skills. Those are the kind of people we want to reach out to and train people up from those disadvantaged areas, because we haven't got the skills to deliver this without them. So it's a win-win. You know, we win because we get the skill sets to deliver the programme. That raises people's standard of living, and it's not short-term. It's not a flash in the pan. When we raise those skill sets, there'll be jobs there for the next decade or two on the back of it. So it's a really exciting time, and I think it achieves both agendas, carbon zero and levelling up, provided we work together.
Yeah. We've got a really live example, Rachel, and I'm going to mention the clean air zone debate that we've got here.
I almost deliberately didn't go there.
No, I don't mind. No, it's important to raise it because it's nice. I won't go to all the, you won't get all of the angst. But I think there is something to learn from this, which is if central government imposes, as they have done, and they've done it in Bradford, haven't they, Tracy, as well, a requirement, and we didn't mind the requirement because we want to clean up the air as well, without sufficient support for people to change, and there wasn't sufficient support, and then just says it's going to be done by stick, not by carrot, you end up losing hearts and minds in an era when there is a genuine cost of living crisis. And the economy of Leeds, Liverpool and Manchester is not London. You know, things are more fragile here. They're more difficult here. And I think if you can do it by incentives, you should do it via incentives, because then you'll bring people with you and you'll get the behaviour change. If this journey is one of charges and sticks and fines and taxes, genuinely, will that, everyone's got to ask themselves, it might work okay if we're on a certain income, you'll say, oh, well, I'll be all right. But if you're not, and you're, as Steve was saying, paying for your electric on a, you know, on a prepaid card or whatever, that journey to net zero is going to be a much more difficult thing. And we could end up with not greener, fairer, but a more unequal country at the end of this if we're not, if it's done by Whitehall in the old way of just slapping requirements on local areas, not funding it properly, then you will get resentment and you will lose people. And I just think incentives is the way to do this. Help people with their business, help people with the cost of living, get hearts and minds behind it. My worry is the public perception is it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be charges, taxes, changes they may not want to make. And that is a real issue that we've got to debate properly as a country. Otherwise, we won't get the public with us on this.
Okay. Any other questions out on the floor? Yeah, to the gentleman down here. Sorry, the microphone's at the back, so we'll go to the lady there, please, first, and then we'll come down here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheryl Howes, Director of Energy Capital at the Partnership at the West Midlands Combined Authority. I had a question around incentivising behaviour. One of the things that's particularly important to us is that we see a smarter energy system to actually incentivise the things we're talking about in terms of trying to decarbonise the transport system, decarbonise buildings, and actually have a market that makes that happen, rather than just a market that incentivises big building of energy generation and big storage. I just wondered whether the panel had any views on whether they think that's something that we should all be working together on, or whether that's not something that's on their agenda.
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
I think, if you look at the approach we're taking an approach that does have the macro assets. So we are looking at the big battery, the big solar farms, etc. But we are looking at the more localised energy generation activity on a number of fronts, a number of asset bases, whether that's behind the meter battery and solar, the EV infrastructure we talked about. And probably akin to that, just going back to the incentive point that was made there, one of the commitments we've made is that if we work with local authorities or private sector partners for that matter, once we get over a hurdle rate of return, which we would expect to be a normal rate of return, we want to share that upside. Selfishly for us, we want to share the upside because we want a long-term contract. But actually it puts money back in the economy rather than having to think about taxing people. And again, I go back to now is a perfect time to do that because this is going to go on for a long time. So I think there's a blend between the macro level assets, and you'll see, especially over the next 5 to 10 years, you'll start to see a real ramp up of more micro assets, often behind the meter. That will happen.
Steve, have you any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think I was saying before about innovation, and I mean that just not about doing things, but approaches. So that's one of the approaches that we're looking at as well. And national government can't do these sorts of things for us, but you will find, I don't know whether you're doing that in West Midlands, we're looking at these things in the Liverpool City region. I'm sure others are, but we do need help. We need some assistance sometimes, and it feels as if we're out there as outliers, really, instead of pilots and stuff that can be used, and the national government supporting that to roll it out. But we'll carry on doing it despite the government.
I think one of the challenges, and I saw in one of the previous sessions, is green finance, and how do you make it work at these massive levels with big business like Northern Power Grid, talking to them, and that is the challenge. And it was really great that the Green Infrastructure Bank have come to lead. So the money is there for businesses to come, but it's about having patient investment, isn't it?
But isn't it about the distribution, Tracy? We always moan, don't we, about the Green Book. The Green Book is still dictating things, and the Green Book methodology is holding us back.
Yeah.
Just one thing that may be of interest, Rachel, to people is we've been the first area in the country to map local energy systems in all of our 10 boroughs, and I think it's being published today. In fact, the combination of the 10 local energy plans for all of Greater Manchester, and what that has done is I don't know whether West Midlands are starting to look at something similar. I'm sure you probably are, but it's really clear where there are localised energy supply systems and where the gaps are, and it really exposes what we need. I think 65 billion is what we're going to need invested in our energy systems. Not today. I have a few gulps there. I gulped when I saw that number, but between now and 2038. And we've got to think with Neil and colleagues in the energy sector as how do we encourage people to help find some of that investment, because sometimes there will be very localised energy systems that will work, and then get, as you say, a return for them on a longer term basis. So that piece of work is done. We think it's the first in the country, and it might help people understand the scale of the challenge that's ahead of us on energy.
Our time is up, but one last question from the gentleman here. The microphone's just coming to you here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to address this to Andy, Mirror Greater Manchester. I work for the Blur Foundation with Niall, who you recognised earlier. Just going back to retrofitting and training.
Yep.
Sorry, maybe to the guy, what standards are you going to have for this training? Who's going to lay out the skills matrix for all this training? Is it going to be down to SSC? Is it going to be down to the local authorities? Who's going to be responsible for this? Because obviously you're going to have this. We've got the skills gap at the moment where we've got circa 80,000 jobs, out there, waiting to be taken. So who's going to be responsible for setting up, let's say, the skills matrix, so you have a level playing field of trade, of the trades of fitting these heat source pumps, of net zero carbonising houses and private domestic residence and things like that.
Well, people need to know there is a consistent gold standard, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, I think this is obviously where the government comes in, isn't it? So, you know, we can't do that at our level, and we wouldn't really want to, because if someone, I want us to go more quickly on retrofitting so that the young people who get that experience can then go to other parts of the country, you know, so their skills are transportable, you know, and they've got jobs for life, which is, we always say this, Steve and I, we've lived in the northwest of England all our lives. At no point have we been able to say to the younger generation here, if you train in this set of skills, you'll have a good job for life. But that is the case now with the 2050 challenge for the UK. It's a great thing to be able to say, but we're not ready yet in terms of the clarity about qualifications. So I think it is T levels. So I think the Secretary of State wears his badge with T levels on. Well, good, we support T levels, but get them in the right place now. I'm sure Neil will know it's other qualifications, isn't it? We need the qualifications and curriculum authority to really set out the standards. And that's their role, and then it'll be our role to get the numbers of people coming through with those qualifications. So it is not just us taking over it all, it's a partnership with the centre. But I think we would all say they're nowhere near that at this stage. We're talking about retrofitting. Central government is some way off the pace, I think, when it comes to...
Just on qualifications, though, it's not even the government, it's the industry lead bodies that come up with the standards, and the standards then are set and they're agreed through QCA to be funded, and then we can fund those programs, but we need the money to fund those programs. So the standards are there. You could do one, anyone can do a course. They're available to you. And
they are a bit patchy at the moment, though, aren't
yeah,
they?
we can fund those programs. Well, that is the supply side of things. So the stuff's there, and we just need enough people to do it, but we need the young people to be funded. We've got young people, we've got companies, we've got standards, and we've got a levy that's lying in a pot somewhere. There's something amiss.
We're going to have to draw it to a close. I'm really sorry because there's so much to talk about, but I really, really appreciate the time that you have all given this afternoon, and thank you everyone here as well for listening and contributing. What I like about coming here and doing this is away from a radio studio where we talk about problems a lot. It's really energising to hear about solutions that are working. And I know there are big challenges as well that you're highlighting here today, but the kind of drive and determination to meet those challenges is it's really inspiring. So thank you very much, representing Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire and Liverpool and SSE, of course. Steve, Neil, Tracy and Andy, thank you very much.